Some books we read and remember, while some books become defining moments for us. They change the trajectory of our lives. So the first session is about the books that inspire me, books every entrepreneur and professional must read. And the session members are Vinita Bali. Vinita Bali served as a managing director of Britannic Industries from Jan 2005 to 2014. She's been ranked among the world's top 50 businesswomen. She received a Forbes Leadership Award. Under her direction, Britannia revenue tripled. Bali was awarded as a Business Woman of the Year award in the 2009 Economic Times Awards. She received the Asian Center for Corporate Governance and Sustainability. She has had high-quality Indian and international stints, having worked and lived in the UK, Nigeria, South Africa, USA, and Chile. Currently, Ms. Bali serves on the board of large Indian and international corporates, including Titan, Chrysler, World Gold Council, etc. She has done her education, bachelor's degree from the Lady Shri Ram College for Women and University of Delhi, and an MBA from Jairaj. Our session moderator would be Jairaj. He is currently the president of the Century Club. He is regarded as one of the most result-oriented CEOs in the public sector undertakings. He retired as Additional Chief Secretary, Government of Karnataka, Additional Chief Secretary, Energy Department, and Chairman, BESCOM, Managing Director, Bangalore International Airport, are some of the positions which he has held. He has served with the World Bank as a Senior Public Sector Management Specialist. He holds a bachelor's from the Bangalore University, MA from the Delhi School of Economics, and an MPA from the Woodrow Wilson at the Princeton, MPA from the Kennedy School of Government, Harvard University. Interestingly, I keep getting the nomination of Jairaj as the best alumnus of the Harvard University for the last 3 years. And the third analyst is V. Raghunathan. He is the CEO of GMR Bharatmi Foundation. He was earlier the managing director of GMR Industries, president ING Vaishya Bank, professor of finance and accounting at the IIM Ahmedabad. He is currently holding several board memberships of banks, stock exchanges, educational institutions. He's been in several committees, including the Ministry of Finance, SEBI, PSE, NSE. He has also been the MBA program and finance chair at the IIM Ahmedabad for several years. He's written close to 500 academic papers and popular articles, 12 books, and he was listed among Thinkers 50, the list of top 50 global Indian management thinkers. Over to the panel, and this is a book which we need to give.
Festival, and also in particular warm welcome to Century Club. I'll just take 2 minutes before I hand over this mic to Vinita Bali. I'm associated here because of the distinguished personalities present. To my right, my dear friend from IIM Ahmedabad days, Professor Raghunathan, who's straddled the worlds of academia and industry so effortlessly, and now so involved in the not-for-profit sector. And then, to his right, is the person who's already been introduced as the doyen among Indian managers, the face of Indian industry, and now, sitting on so many boards worldwide, Vinita Bali. The second reason why I am here is because I want to endorse the worthwhile attempt made by Benedict in organizing a book festival of this kind. Congratulations, Benedict. He's thrown a lonely furrow, you can believe me when I say that, because to get people to endorse this and to get all these sponsors is not an easy task. But he is persevered, and this is the result of his perseverance. So Benedict, more power to you. I wish you all the best. So folks, before I hand this over to Vinita, I want to tell you that this is the Century Club, started almost 100 years ago by Sir M. Vishweshwaraya. Probably the greatest statesman this country has produced, an engineer and an administrator rolled into one. And the reason why he started this club is very interesting. It's because he was refused admission, Raghu, to another club on account of his wearing the turban. So he, in a fit of indignation, said, well, if they can't have me, I'm going to start a club of my own with 100 people, and that's how the Century Club came into being. And so I'm very pleased to welcome you to the club. And now, without much ado, I'd like to hand this over to Vinita to make her presentation. Thank you. Vinita.
To participate in this Lit Fest, which actually sounds much better than a Lit Fest. There's a buzz about this Lit Fest. So I think we've embarked on something. I think the story that Mr. Jairaj just shared with us is ample fodder for a book to be written about the creation of institutions such as the Century Club, which somehow we take it for granted. And I'd like to make a few remarks for about 15 to 20 minutes, if that's okay, and then we'll throw it open to questions for another 15 to 20 minutes to stay on time. When Raghu first spoke to me and said that we're organizing this festival and we'd like you to come and talk about, the business books that have impacted you. I thought to myself and I said that actually there is a big difference between business books and what I like here, which is about the culture of reading, writing and publishing of business literature, which is not necessarily found in a book. I think the big difference I see between, business books and other books, of course, non-fiction is great, you just use your imagination, throw in a few facts and you can write a good non-fiction book. The thing with business books really is that, either they have to come up with a new profound idea that changes the way you think about things, or they have to be able to capture what is happening in the real world. And in that context, when I started thinking about it, I came to the conclusion that the best business book I have read is actually not a book. For me, it is a whole series of magazines, but I think the one that I particularly enjoy reading is The Economist. And I want to quote to you from what The Economist, very interestingly, I'm sure a lot of you have seen this, says on the first page itself, which establishes their reason for being. So they say something like, and my words may not be perfect, but it says, published since 1843, to take part in the severe contest between intelligence, which presses forward, and a timid, untamed ignorance, constricting our progress. I really think if you think about those words and what The Economist does, it does comprehensively, it does holistically, and it does consistently. The reason why I'm even saying this is because business operates in a context. Business is part of a larger ecosystem. And I think those of us who have been students of business, continue to be interested in how business works, have worked in the corporate sector, not just in India but in other countries in the world, you realize that business is about more than just business. It is about understanding politics, it is about understanding economics, it is about understanding consumer behavior, customer behavior, it is about understanding how markets work, it's about understanding finance. So, in order to really be conversant with business, I don't believe you can get all of that in a book. Of course, we all have to read books and so on, and I see there are several professors, ex-professors and current professors from IIM sitting here. So I think, the books we have to read. But as a practitioner of business, as a lifelong student of business, as someone who is interested in knowing how markets work, why some corporations are more successful than other corporations and so on, it is very important to be current. It is very important to be able to have the ability to abstract from the general what the core concepts are. So I am by no means sort of undervaluing the importance of business books. And I actually sat this morning and wrote out a list of books that have actually influenced me, and I'm happy to talk about some of these. But I do think that for anybody who's interested in business, you have to be interested in politics, you have to be interested in geography, you have to be interested in how markets work, you have to be interested in consumers and consumer behavior. Today we are all completely smitten by, the startups and, e-commerce and all the things that are happening. The fact really is that India simultaneously lives in many centuries. So on the one hand, we've got people who are buying on e-commerce, we do everything on our smartphones. On the other hand, and this is part of the work that I do in the not-for-profit sector space, there is still India that doesn't have electricity, that doesn't have water, that doesn't have a lot of the things that people like us take for granted. And business has to concern itself with all these multiple realities. Which is why, if you think about some of the recent management literature, whether it is the book that Muhammad Yunus wrote on social enterprise, whether it is Michael Porter, who was the guru who taught us all what competitive strategy and competitive advantage is, the work that he's currently doing in this whole area of creating shared value, which is all about a simple fact that unless business is actually able to take into account the interest of all stakeholders, you cannot have a sustainable and profitable business. There are many other people who've said the same thing. We've heard about triple bottom line, we've heard about conscious capitalism from none other than Sisodia. We've heard about the 3 Ps, people, profit, planet, and so on and so forth. The point I'm making is that business literature has also evolved over time. As I sat this morning and I was thinking about, what are those books that influenced me, as a student of management and even later on. It's almost like that there were books that were written in the 60s which sort of created the base knowledge, whether it was Alfred Sloan's My Years with General Motors, when he really talks about, at that time, the fact that a car for every purse and a car for every purpose. This was written sometime in the early 60s. Or the book that Thomas McGregor first wrote, which started this whole thing of Theory X and Theory Y. Now these were books written in the 60s. These were books written by practitioners who actually did something at that time, it was in the factory, and who then extrapolated what they learned out of it and created, I believe, books that changed the way fundamentally that business thought about itself. Staying with the management literature and manufacturing, the work that Deming did in the 80s He didn't call it total quality management, but actually he set in motion the principles of TQM, which we are still living by, and which still continue to impact and influence the way industry and business manages itself. I take just these three examples, not because there aren't any other books, but I'm using these as illustrations of a very simple concept that I want to share with you. And that is that business is about having an appreciation and a sensitivity to reality. And it is about the power to then capture and encapsulate those ideas into a framework that has sustainability, that has enduring value, and that is abiding. As I was thinking about the concepts of management and management literature, I was very influenced. I did my MBA with a specialization in marketing. I was very influenced by the writings of, you probably have met him, Professor Theodore Levitt in Harvard. And here was Professor Levitt, who was a professor of marketing, and he wrote wonderful books like The Marketing Imagination. He wrote about concepts of management. He is the one who first talked about generic products and differentiated products. He is the one who first talked about the globalization of markets. He is the one who first wrote in HBR about how the McDonald's business is not just a consumer-facing business, but it is also an industrial business because of the way McDonald's had structured its supply chain. The reason I'm sharing this with you is that in the 60s and the 80s and the early 90s, I believe we had some very, very rich literature emanating in management. Books written by Charles Handy, when he talked about the age of unreason, which I think was sometime in the mid to late 80s, where he talked fundamentally about how work will be different. He talked about, the changing shape of work. He talked about the changing demographics and the impact those would have. And of course, the all-time great Peter Drucker, who I have had the pleasure, the opportunity, and the very, very good fortune of meeting when I worked with the Coca-Cola company in Atlanta. Met him twice or thrice. One time we spent almost half a day where Professor Drucker just came and talked to us about his thoughts on management and so on. And if you look, I would say for everybody who's interested in management, not just a management student, but anybody who's interested in management, I think The Essential Drucker, which was published in the early 2000s, is really the best distillation of his thoughts. Here was Peter Drucker in the 1970s talking about the knowledge economy. Here was Peter Drucker in the 70s talking about learning organizations. So I think one thing that distinguishes great management thinkers from anybody else is that they have the ability to foresee what is likely to happen in the future. Whether it is a Charles Handy, whether it is a Peter Drucker, whether it is several other people. Then there are other management thinkers who have influenced us because they have come up with concepts that are so critical in terms of guiding behaviors that lead to success. Think about the whole genre of work. I alluded to Michael Porter earlier, what he did in competitive strategy, when he talked about differentiation, cost, focus. Or you think about the work done by Gary Hamel on the whole area around core competencies and how they have shaped the evolution of strategy, from stick to your core competencies, later developed by management consultants like Bain, in the books of people like Chris Zook, etc., where they talked about profit from the core and saying that you've got to first strengthen the core before you get to the adjacency. So I can go on and on a lot about some of the management principles that arose out of the ability of people like Drucker, Handy. Warren Bennis is another wonderful writer, who talks about leadership. It's become, very topical and very fashionable to talk about leadership today. But Warren Bennis, again in the late 80s, early 90s, wrote about On Becoming a Leader, which I believe was a path-breaking piece of work done at that time on differentiates great leaders. Then you've got the entire gamut of work done by Collins and so on, good to great, what makes companies great and so on. So there's a very rich management literature that comes out of extrapolation, that comes out of real experience, which is then told as a story with a distillation and extraction of management principles. And then you've got a whole body of literature that is developing today, where suddenly, everybody's realized that at the end of the day, the only competitive advantage you have is people. So there are many books, Ram Charan is writing about the people advantage, hardcore strategists are writing about the people advantage. There is a wonderful book written by a consultant who works with Egon Zehnder, who talks about it's not the what and the why, but the how, and the how is all about people. There are some very good, I think there's some very good literature on people that has come from not just management authors and business people, but from people who worked in education. There's a wonderful book that certainly I've been influenced by. It's a book called Human Dynamics, written by two authors who come from the fields of psychology and education, where they have done work with about 40,000 people across 25 cultures and looked simply at the differences in terms of how people look at information, how they process information, how they make judgments based on that information, and how they behave as a result of all of that. So I think management literature and business literature is replete with some wonderful examples that enable practitioners to connect with concepts, that enable academics to connect with practice, and that enable the rest of us who are simply interested in business because we are surrounded by business either as consumers, customers, or as propagators of the business, to actually spend some time thinking about what business is thinking about. Corporate social responsibility, interestingly, there's another wonderful person I want to mention, and where again I had the fortune of working in a company which is eponymous with his name. This is Sir Adrian Cadbury. I used to work for Cadbury Schweppes in many countries around the world, and again was fortunate enough to not just meet with Sir Adrian but also spend some time with him. There is a book which I think is so relevant today, which was published sometime in the end 1900s, early 2000, based on work that he had done in the early 1992 or so on corporate governance and the role of CEOs and chairmen. With everything that we're talking about today on governance, with everything that we're talking about today on corporate social responsibility, with everything that people like Michael Porter are saying about creating shared value, Sir Adrian wrote about all of this in a great book called Corporate Governance and Chairmanship, where he talks about the responsibility of business to all its stakeholders, the responsibility of business to communities and societies in which business works. And he delineates there what is the responsibility of the chairman, the board, and how effective businesses need to organize themselves differently if they are really to add value to society and to the world we live in. So it's not an exhaustive list, but it is, I think a fair list of books that have certainly made a very big impact on me. They continue to be on my bookshelf. I, highlight and I mark them, and once in a while, it is great to go back and revisit them. Of course, there is a whole other literature on management, which is the continuing literature, where you get inspired by the biography of, the founders of Apple and what Amazon has done, and what Richard Branson did with his airline and so on. That's like, I would call that light business reading. But I do believe that for anybody who's interested in business, it's not just about the books. I think I like to read books which are conceptual, which are an abstraction, which make me think differently. But I think business is about staying current with the trends. So in that context, if there is one magazine that at least I have figured out that helps me stay abreast is the combination of reading The Economist and reading the Financial Times, and you pretty much know what the world of business is thinking about. Thank you very much. I'd be happy to answer.
Compelling, comprehensive, and it contains such a universe of ideas and management thoughts. Thank you, Vinita.
Thank you.
Now it's open to you. You can make brief interjections.